The wheels of Clara Voss's coffee cart squeaked softly as she rolled it down the sterile corridor of Ravenwood Command's classified briefing wing. To everyone around her, she was just another catering assistant in a pale blue uniform, utterly invisible to the high-ranking officers discussing matters of national security. But when she spoke just 3 words to confirm a coffee order, "Extra cream, sir," one man at the briefing table went rigid with shock. General Adrian Holt's face drained of color as he recognized a voice he thought he'd never hear again, a voice that belonged to Cipher Nine, the deep black communications operative who had vanished into the shadows after a catastrophic mission in Warsaw 3 years ago. She was the same operative whose sacrifice had saved his entire task force, whose disappearance had haunted his dreams, whose real identity was buried so deep that even he wasn't supposed to know it. But voices don't lie. Cipher 9 was standing 3 feet away from him, hiding in plain sight behind a coffee cart and a false name. The morning sun filtered through reinforced windows as Clara Bennett adjusted her hairnet and checked the contents of her mobile coffee station for the 3rd time. Steam rose from the industrial coffee maker while pastries sat arranged in neat rows beneath plastic covers, everything positioned with the kind of military precision that came naturally after years of discipline. The base cafeteria manager had assigned her to the classified wing again, a rotation she appreciated for its solitude, but dreaded for its proximity to memories she worked hard to suppress. Ravenwood Command hummed with the quiet efficiency of a well-oiled machine, its corridors alive with personnel moving purposefully between briefing rooms, operation centers, and offices. For 6 months, Clara had been part of this ecosystem as a civilian contractor, blending into the background with practiced invisibility. Her supervisor praised her reliability and discretion, noting how she never lingered where sensitive conversations might be overheard and always kept a professional distance from the personnel she served. What her supervisor didn't know was that Clara's discretion came from training far more intensive than any food service orientation. None of them knew that the soft-spoken woman who refilled their coffee cups had once been the voice in their earpieces during missions that never officially existed, guiding special forces teams through hostile territory with information that meant the difference between success and catastrophic failure. The briefing room she was approaching held particular significance. Today, it hosted the quarterly review of counterintelligence operations in Eastern Europe. She had read the roster when she picked up her assignment sheet, recognizing names of officers she had once worked with, men and women who had trusted her voice to lead them through some of the most dangerous missions in recent history. And then there was General Adrian Holt, the man whose task force she had guided through Warsaw, whose team she had saved at the cost of her own cover, whose voice still haunted her dreams, calling for extraction coordinates that would never come. He wouldn't recognize her face, few had ever seen Cipher 9 without tactical gear. But her voice, that was another matter entirely. The cart's wheels caught slightly on a scuff in the linoleum as Clara approached the door. Through the reinforced glass, she saw a dozen officers around a polished conference table, eyes fixed on satellite imagery displayed on wall-mounted screens. The room carried that unique tension, urgency wrapped in methodical preparation, that always preceded dangerous missions. She knocked twice on the doorframe. "Coffee service," she announced, pitching her voice slightly higher than usual, a habit she'd perfected these last 6 months. "Come in," called Colonel Ethan Vargas, the base intelligence officer. The door opened with a pneumatic hiss. Clara pushed her cart inside, moving with an ease that seemed casual but was carefully calculated to avoid drawing attention. Her gaze swept the table, cataloging faces and seating positions, her situational awareness never truly dormant. At the far end sat General Holt, silver hair catching the light, leaning over a tactical map marked with red zones and blue friendly positions. His face bore the lines of decades spent making life and death decisions, but his eyes were still sharp, the eyes of a man who had earned his legend in special operations. "Regular coffee, black," Vargas said without looking up. "And whatever pastries you have." "Certainly, sir," Clara replied, parking her cart near the wall. The officers kept talking as she worked, their voices a backdrop of military jargon and strategic considerations. Snippets floated to her: asset placement in Riga, deep cover communication protocols, contingency plans for extraction. To most, it was coded language. To her, it painted vivid operational maps. The Warsaw protocols are still our gold standard, Holt was telling a younger officer. Cipher Nine's procedures saved 12 lives that night, even after we lost contact with base. The precision of those coordinates under fire was extraordinary. Her hand trembled slightly as she poured coffee. Hearing her codename aloud was like a ghost's breath on her neck, pulling Warsaw's final hours into razor-sharp focus. The after-action report said Cipher 9 was compromised during extraction, the younger officer said. Do we know what happened to the operative? Holt's face darkened. Missing in action, presumed dead. The operation was compromised at the highest level, and our operative chose radio silence rather than risk exposing the extraction route. Extraordinary courage and sacrifice. Those words hit hard. She had chosen silence over safety because speaking would have given away the location of 12 operators. One life versus 12, it had been no choice at all. Coffee for General Holt, Vargas instructed. She carried the mug to the head of the table, each step feeling like quicksand. Here you are, sir, she said softly, placing it beside him. He looked up briefly, gave a polite thank you, and returned to his work. Relief washed over her, until Vargas added, actually, could you add extra cream? He likes it lighter. It was nothing, routine. But it meant speaking again. Extra cream, sir, she asked. The effect was immediate. Holt froze mid-sip, color draining from his face. His eyes locked on hers with laser intensity. Cipher 9, he whispered. Every head in the room turned. Clara felt her cover splinter. The cream pitcher in her hand seemed suddenly heavy. I think there's been some mistake, she said, voice still in the higher register of her false identity. But Holt was already on his feet, his voice quiet but certain. Same cadence, same clarity. Warsaw, March 11th, you guided us through the Vistula sector when our GPS failed. Vargas's eyes narrowed. Adrian, are you saying our catering assistant is Cipher 9, the operative missing for 3 years? Missing, presumed dead, corrected Major Daniel Reeve, the intelligence officer. Her identity was classified above top secret. How would you know? I don't know what she looks like, Holt replied. I know what she sounds like. That voice saved my team's lives. Clara tried again. I'm just Clara Bennett from the catering company, but she could see the recognition in Holt's eyes. The way she stood. The micro-expressions. The habits of training that never went away. Holt's voice softened. Clara Bennett. CB Cipher 9's file listed only initials. The deduction was airtight. Reeve tapped rapidly on his tablet. Records show Cipher 9 was declared Kia after her safe house was compromised. No body recovered, intel suggested capture. Intelligence was wrong, Holt said firmly. She vanished deliberately to protect operational security. There was no point denying it now. Clara dropped her false tone. If I were Cipher 9, which I'm not confirming, what would you want to know? Holt exhaled. We thought you were dead. The agency spent months looking. Her throat tightened. For 3 years, she had believed she'd been written off as expendable. Reeve looked up. Your last transmission gave secondary extraction coordinates. When we got there, no sign of you. Because I never went, Clara said before she could stop herself. The entire comm network was infiltrated. Extracting would have led enemy forces straight to our assets in Prague, Tallinn, and Bucharest. 12 operatives would have been blown. Vargas stared at her. So you chose to disappear. It was survival, for me, and for them. Cipher 9 had to die so they could live. Holt's voice softened. We could have protected you. Rebuilt the network. With respect, General, Warsaw was compromised from the inside. Someone high up was feeding intel to hostile forces. Extraction was a trap. The room went still. An inside mole was every intel officer's nightmare. Reeve leaned forward. You're saying someone in the Warsaw task force was a traitor? I'm saying our enemies knew everything, safe house locations, comm schedules, extraction routes. That doesn't come from luck. Holt's expression was grim. Who knew the extraction coordinates? 8 people, he replied to Vargas's question. Clara stepped away from her cart and took a seat at the table, her posture shifting from deference to command presence. Warsaw wasn't the only compromise. 3 previous missions, same personnel overlap. This was systematic. Reeve checked databases. If true, these failures go back nearly 2 years. That's why she couldn't risk extraction. Vargas nodded slowly. Coming home would have exposed her to the mole. Holt looked at her with something close to admiration. You've been hiding in plain sight for 3 years, working here to monitor for signs of ongoing compromise. I needed to know if it was safe to resurface, she admitted. And? Vargas pressed. The compromise appears contained here. But elsewhere? I can't guarantee. Reeve looked at her seriously. You need to be debriefed. This intel could save lives. Her chest tightened. Debriefing meant exposure. It meant returning to the dangerous world she'd fought to escape. Holt met her eyes. I understand why you disappeared. But you can't stay hidden forever. The intelligence you hold is too important. What guarantees can you give, she countered, that debriefing won't expose me to the same forces that burn Warsaw? Vargas offered, new protocols. Compartmentalization. Enhanced background checks. Run by some of the same people who had Warsaw access, she replied coolly. Reeve cut in. If she has intel on a mole, we act on it. Regardless of risk. Holt leaned forward. What would it take for you to trust us? Independent verification, she said at last. Debriefing by personnel with no Warsaw ties. And full compartmentalization to keep my survival secret. Vargas nodded slowly. DIA could do it. They weren't involved in Warsaw. I also want the Warsaw compromise investigated before any debriefing, Clara added. Prove the threat is gone before I risk my life again. Holt frowned. That would require acknowledging your survival, which could put you at risk. Reeve raised a hand. What if we investigate under the cover story that Cipher 9 left intel behind before vanishing? Major Reeve's suggestion hung in the air like the first crack of thunder before a storm. What if we investigate under the cover story that Cipher 9 left intel behind before vanishing, he said again, slower this time, as though daring anyone to challenge it. It was, Clara admitted silently, a clever move. It gave Holt and Vargas the excuse to dig into the Warsaw compromise without waving a red flag to whoever had betrayed them. But clever moves in this world often came with knives hidden under the table. Let's be clear, Clara said, leaning back just enough to signal she wasn't accepting anything at face value. If you run this under my name in any form, even as a rumor, it's over. You'll draw them to me like sharks to blood. Vargas lifted his pen from the pad. The cover won't use your name. We'll phrase it as, a forgotten cache of encrypted transmissions. Messages that were never decrypted after Warsaw. That gives us cause to reopen mission records, interview personnel, and monitor responses without anyone realizing we're looking for a mole. And the bait? Clara asked. Reeve's lips curled faintly. We'll plant a fabricated location in those fake transmissions, an old safe house in Tallinn. It won't actually exist, but anyone feeding information to hostile forces will flag it as active. We monitor who reacts. It was a textbook counterintelligence trap, classic enough to be in training manuals, dangerous enough to make Clara's pulse quicken. And if they bite, she asked. Then we know our mole is still active, Holt said flatly. A silence settled over the room. Clara could almost hear the invisible gears turning, calculations about risk, resources, the political mess that would erupt if a high-ranking officer was unmasked. This works, she admitted. But I won't be involved directly. Not yet. Holt's eyes narrowed. You'd sit this out? After 3 years? I've been watching from the shadows for a reason, Clara said. If I step in too soon, anyone with a long enough memory will recognize my methods. You run your trap. I'll run mine. That caught Vargas's attention. You have something in mind? Clara hesitated. The idea had been simmering in the back of her mind since she'd first noticed Holt on the meeting roster. A way to flush out the mole without exposing herself, at least, not completely. I have contacts outside official channels. People who owe me favors from before Warsaw. I can leak a different set of breadcrumbs, unrelated to Tallinn, but close enough to the truth to sting. Reeve frowned. Parallel traps are risky. If they overlap. They won't, Clara cut in. And if they do, we'll know the mole's network is wider than you think. Holt watched her for a long moment, the weight of command in his gaze. If you're doing this, you do it clean. No bodies left behind. Clara's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. That depends on who we catch. Later, when the meeting broke, Holt lingered at the door. Clara, he said quietly, you could disappear again. You've done it before. Why stay? Her answer was simple. Because last time I ran, 12 people lived. If I run now, more will die. That night, in the small apartment she rented off base, Clara set the stage. She pulled out a battered laptop, unconnected to any network, and a phone with no SIM card. In the dim light, she wrote a single message in code only a few surviving operatives would recognize. Found a thread. Same pattern as Warsaw. Contact in Budapest confirmed anomaly. Trust no one with full details. She didn't sign it. The network would know it was her. And so would the mole. Somewhere in the shadows, someone would start moving pieces on the board. And when they did, Clara Voss would be watching. By dawn, Ravenwood's counter-intel cell moved like surgeons. Reeve drafted the memo that didn't exist, a dusty rediscovered envelope of undecrypted field bursts, allegedly misfiled after Warsaw. Vargas routed it through a narrow corridor of watchers, 2 analysts, 1 archival tech, and a systems auditor, no more. Holt signed off without stamping a seal. The absence was the seal. If anyone outside that corridor referenced the material, they didn't see it here. The bait was simple, elegant, and audacious, an old safe house marker in Tallinn, attached to a phantom courier protocol and a 6-digit dead drop tag. The note implied a forgotten cache might still be on site. Reeve sprinkled just enough detail to tickle greed and fear in equal measure. Clara didn't step foot in the ops bullpen. She watched from the edges, a security camera feed mirrored to a laptop that shouldn't exist, telemetry borrowed from an unremarkable antenna 2 blocks off base. Her world shrank to a grid of statuses, timestamps, and microspikes in network traffic that would look like noise to anyone else. At 10:13, the first nudge arrived, so small it would have passed unnoticed. An access token pinged the archive index, not the file itself. A smart thief checks the hallway before the vault. The token belonged to Lieutenant Colonel Nora Pike, Systems Access Division. Authorized, boring, meticulous. Clara marked the name and waited. At 10:29, Pike did nothing at all, which was louder than a scream. She left her station, bought coffee, chatted with the turnstile guard, then returned and opened a maintenance ticket to recalibrate an air sensor near the records bay. Vargas, reading the same log, cursed softly, "She's masking a walk-by." Holt said nothing, but the skin around his eyes tightened. At 11:06, the phantom Tallinn marker rippled. A scraping call from an external node hit a public weather API in Estonia, hopped through a discount VPN, and brushed a municipal property map, all legally, all innocently, and then paused over a derelict building 3 blocks from the port. 2 minutes later, a second node scraped ferry schedules. Someone, somewhere, was mapping approaches. "Hook set," Reeve whispered. "Don't twitch," Clara said. "They'll tug first." Parallel to the decoy, Clara's own breadcrumb surfaced. The burn phone without a SIM, useless to anyone but a handful of ghosts, had lit up at 5:41 with a blind ping, 3 punctuation marks in a sequence only a dead network could love. Marta Kovacs, Budapest. Exfil runner. Not agency, Not DIA, one of theirs and not theirs, the kind of person who didn't sign NDAs so much as she shredded them. The ping said she was willing to talk. The timing said she'd already heard the rumor Clara hadn't told. Clara met her at noon in a bakery that smelled of warm rye and lemon glaze, a place noisy enough to be private. Marta was older than Clara remembered, cheekbones like sharpened stone, eyes that saw everything once and filed it correctly. You light candles in the dark, they attract moths, Marta said without prelude. You're noisy today. Not me, Clara replied. The wind. Marta slid an envelope across the table. No name, only a notch at the corner. Inside, a USB wrapped in aluminum, a cutout photo of a docking bollard at an unidentified marina, and a post-it with a single word, lantern. Clara's pulse tripped. Where did you get this? Friend of a friend with a habit of not dying. He says someone's buying safe harbors. Pays in cash and passports. Uses middlemen who don't know their own middlemen. Lantern is either the project or the prayer. Handler? Changed twice since Warsaw. But there's a scent of old paper. Diplomatic pouches, cultural exchanges, think tank symposia. People who talk about ethics with silk in their voices. Clara filed the texture, not just the facts. Silk meant influence, not money. Old paper meant cover environments that aged well, archives, museums, universities, embassies. Any names? Marta shook her head. Only a shadow that calls itself Kell. Could be a surname, could be a joke. Could be both. Clara left the bakery by a different door, took 3 buses in the wrong direction, and returned to her apartment on foot. On her laptop, the Tallinn feed fluttered, a rental van idled too long near the port, then left without parking. A dry run. 20 minutes later, Pike filed a second maintenance ticket, this one for a temperature irregularity in an adjacent server room. Another hallway check. Holt convened a microbrief at 1500 hours. We send eyes to Tallinn? No uniforms, Clara said. Nothing that smells like us. Local assets only. The second a rucksack looks tactical, they'll leave a thank you bomb and a camera. Who do we have in country? Vargas asked. Reeves scrolled his tablet. A retired case officer who trains security guards, a customs inspector who drinks too much, and a grad student who thinks smuggling is a sociological concept. Holt grunted. We'll use the trainer. Eyes only. No engagement. The ping came at 1812, the trainer reported a man with a courier's gait, light on his heels, heavy in the shoulders, checking the derelict building's perimeter, filming gutters and door frames. He carried a weathered canvas roll that could hide a short ladder or a rifle. He left without touching anything. Recon for a sensor installation, Clara said. Or a removal. Removal of what? Reeve asked. Whatever they think we forgot in Tallinn. At 2040, Pike finally opened the falsified archival index, but not the file. She copied the index checksum to a paper notepad, closed the window, and called a number that didn't exist. The call passed through a university exchange in Vienna, bounced to a legal office in Prague, and rang out in a membership-only social club in Brussels with no listed owners. Tell me we're recording, Vargas muttered. We're listening, Holt said. Carefully. Clara's burned phone blinked again, 2 punctuation marks this time. Marta, Kell just moved a meeting from Friday to Thursday. Location shift. She attached a grainy capture from a camera that shouldn't have been anywhere near that kind of club, a man in a dark suit with an unremarkable face and remarkable posture, the kind you learn when secrets are your primary muscle. The timestamp and doorframe matched Brussels. Your mole's not freelancing, Marta added. They've got choreography. Clara looked at the still frame until her eyes hurt. If the mole was Pike, she had a conduit. If the conduit was Kell, then lantern wasn't a rumor, it was a lantern in a fog of respectable institutions. And Tallinn was no longer theoretical bait. It was a threshold. Make the call, Clara told Holt. Tallinn goes hot watch at dawn. And keep Pike exactly where she is. Why? Vargas asked. Because if she's our leak, moving her will spook the spider. And I'm not ready to see how fast the web shakes. Outside, Ravenwood's floodlights hummed alive as the first moths drifted in. Inside, the trap's clock began to tick, quiet, polite, and merciless. At 6:17, the Tallinn trainer reported 2 locals installing a sensor pebble under an eave and a discreet trail cam aimed at the alley. A strip of teal tape marked the wall, an insider signal. They're waiting for retrieval, Reeves said. Or baiting someone to take it, Clara replied. Eyes only. No uniforms. On base, Pike filed a maintenance ticket creating a 17-minute window where stale credentials would pass badge readers. Vargas traced the route: Records Bay, Stairwell C, sub-basement racks. Perfect for slipping out data. They let her run. Cameras caught Pike lifting a drive sled from a hot swap bay and leaving under cover of a laundry delivery. Not the file, Clara noted. The index of who accessed it. Kel wants to know who bit the Tallinn Bait. Then Marta pinged. Kel had moved a meeting to a museum annex under renovation. Banner on the fence, a lantern crowned with laurel. It's a brand, Clara said. Pike's courier delivered the sled to the annex. Inside, a blank-faced man, possibly Kel, scanned it and murmured, "Light the harbor and count the sails." Minutes later, a sedan clipped the courier's bike. He fled on foot. At Ravenwood, a fire alarm tripped in records. Pike's badge was active. She doubled back, this time for visitor logs, legacy, metalog mapping. Who requests what? Confronted, Pike's voice cracked. They have my sister and her boy. I sent noise, until Warsaw. Then names. I prayed you were dead, Cipher, because alive, they'd trade you. Kel? Clara asked. He's not the top. Lantern sits in panels, lectures on transparency, smiles while selling us. A shot rang out. Pike went down with a shoulder wound. The sniper fired through vents, precise, calculated. Security sealed the hall, the gunman vanished. Bleeding, Pike whispered, if Tallinn sings, they'll burn Brussels. Then Vienna. Then they'll move you, Cipher, trade you to make the rest of us shut up. Medical took her. Marta intercepted the courier, retrieving the sled. Inside. Lantern Harbor schedule, provisional. THU, Brussels, Annex. FRI, Vienna, Archive. SAT, Tallinn, Port. Sun, Prague, Consulate. Holt met Clara's eyes. Independent debrief. Your condition, granted. And we'll investigate Warsaw without naming you. Clara nodded. Then let's end it. That night, 3 quiet teams hit 3 cities simultaneously. Brussels, empty crates and an abandoned server. Vienna, false manifests and shredded files. Tallinn, Lantern's real meeting point. The port sting ended with 3 arrests, 1 burned passport, and a briefcase of untraceable currency. Kel wasn't among them. But his network was bleeding, and every Lantern port in the schedule was compromised. Back at Ravenwood, Holt stood in the dim light of the briefing room. We didn't get him, he said. We didn't need to, Clara replied. We took away his harbors. He's adrift now. She walked toward the exit, burned phone in her pocket, new shadows waiting beyond the floodlights. For the first time in 3 years, Cipher 9 was no longer in hiding. And somewhere far away, a man with a borrowed face sat in a dark room, a lantern on the table before him. He struck a match, then let it burn down to his fingers before snuffing it out. The game wasn't over. But the board had changed.